Hello, everyone. Welcome to this special panel discussion with the artists from the current exhibition on view at 108 Contemporary in the Arts District in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Exhibition Still provides an opportunity for us to slow down, take a moment to contemplate the simple joys in life, to relish in the handmade, to experience delight of the unexpected, and to explore our emotions without judgment. I'm Kirsten Olds, an art historian, board member at 108 Contemporary, and the Marilyn and Carl Thoma Professor of the Arts and Associate Provost for the Arts at Oklahoma State University, where I am also the director of the OSU Museum of Art. A lot of titles. I am delighted to be joined by the four artists represented in the exhibition Still: Lissa Hunter, Jane Sauer, Joe Stealey, and Carol Stein. We are so happy you're here for our conversation. The program today will consist of about 40 to 45 minutes of conversation, and then we will take questions from you. Please type questions that you have into the Q&A chat, and we'll do our best to address them at the end. ASL interpretation today is provided by Yona Sienna Jasper and Danielle Terrio. So let's get started. Lissa, Jane, Joe, and Carol, thank you for being here and for this beautiful show at 108 Contemporary. I understand you've all been friends for a long time, even though you don't all live in the same place. So Lissa and Carol, you're based in Maine, is that right?
Yes,
That's right.
that's correct.
And then Joe and Jane, you're in the heat in Missouri?
Yes.
Yes.
So I understand you originally got to know one another through contemporary basketry. When was that, and how did that come about?
That's a really good question. Joe, actually, since you are steeped in contemporary basketry history, maybe you can address that.
Well, I think I started out in the early 1980s and actually worked with Jane Sauer and learned to make baskets with Jane in St. Louis. And then as time moved forward a little bit, I started showing my work. And of course, Jane was already very well known at that point. And I remember being at the first basket conference that took place at Arrowmont, Tennessee, and that's where Lissa and I met. And then Carol came into the picture just a couple years later, and I think we met at was it in Vermont?
I think it was the Bennington
I
at
think it
Bennington.
was too.
Mhm.
And so this all took place in the late 80s, early 90s, and we have been friends since. And as time moves forward, we become better and better friends and continue to talk about what we're doing in our own studio practice and our family and our mutual friends. And it's just been a wonderful journey for all of us, I think.
That is beautiful that you've known each other for so long and connected in different ways. Over the pandemic, then you began to connect virtually more frequently. How did the idea for the exhibition take shape?
I think over time, I think we, after maybe a year even, I'm not sure if it was quite that long, we decided, well, maybe we should do something together, a show, and then that sort of went by the wayside for another while. And then I think we decided, okay, we're ready to sort of take this on, and what should our theme be?
In the course of our conversations, we were talking about all aspects of life, and but quite often we would come around to talking about our own studio practice and what was going on in the studio. And so that led us into thinking about doing something together, I think.
I think it was something almost as simple as, wouldn't it be fun if we had a show? And then the reality of making that happen was another set of things that had to take place. But it was sort of off the cuff at first and then became obviously very serious for
I
us.
think when we put the proposal together is when it became
Yeah.
real for us.
Yeah.
I think actually it was almost a byproduct of COVID in that during that time period, we started talking to each other over Zoom. And so we had the community to talk about having a show together, which it would be hard to float emails between us
Right.
and get the same result. So some good things came out of COVID. And I think, the desire to have something to look forward to it was a very burning desire. Okay, there must be something after this. What can we work toward?
Yeah, to get through to the other side.
Yeah.
That was also a period when people were talking about kind of slowing down, seeing the pandemic as an opportunity to, participate in slow food or slow fashion, slow democracy, slow parenting, and then, of course, slow looking. And that slow movement was seen as a way maybe to counter some of the speed and stress and consumerism of present day culture. The exhibition still seems to embody that philosophy. What do you hope that viewers will get from that idea of slowing down and spending time with the work in your show?
I think it has a lot to do with connection with what we do and what people see when they see it and what that space between is. And it's different seeing real things than seeing things on a screen. I think that's a major part of why the idea of slow anything is around us, is because everything is so fast all the time. So this allows us to kind of present what we do, which is frankly for all of us very slow in the making, both I think in contemplating what we're going to do, but also in the actual making of things. It's just a part of our processes. But I think that it's fun to watch people look at work like ours, which tends to have many pieces and has a kind of complexity that looks simple, but it isn't. And literally people will stand 3 feet away and then you'll see them lean in and actually go closer to seeing looking at what they're seeing. So I think it's that connection, for me anyway, that I want people to look at my work and say, oh, that reminds me of something, or how did she do that? Or look at that. That's the first time I've ever seen that in that context. That kind of play, I think, is interesting to all of us.
And I think we're all interested in engaging the viewer to really want to stay with the work and look at it. I think there's an average of 30 seconds that somebody stays with a piece of artwork. And I think all of us are aiming to get our viewers to want to stay with that work longer. And if they don't stay with it that long the first time, to be curious enough about what they're seeing to come back and look at it again and again and see more and think more about how they relate to the work in their own way.
And my work has a lot of text in it, so I don't honestly believe that people will stand in front of the work and read all the text. But I don't think they're going to have an epiphany that now changes their mind either about violence or war. But I'm hopeful that it will be food for thought and that there'll be enough that they pick up to carry that thought forward, for it to impact them in some way.
Well, anecdotally, Jane, in the gallery, I did see people stopping and reading. You have this beautiful complex quilt and reading every panel in that quilt. So spending, far longer than the 6 to 30 seconds or whatever it is before an object.
Oh, thank you. That's really nice to hear. That particular piece, the text that I used was from news reports early in the Ukraine war. I signed up for a newsletter from Ukraine, and I took pictures and made my own version of those pictures that I saw And then the text was actual text from voices as they were experiencing the war. And I just felt like that had more impact than if I made up things that people would say. And I found it very interesting that many people said, oh, I could tell that was from such and such a war, and they'd be completely off. I had a lot of people that thought it was from World War II.
Yeah, yeah.
And
War
I,
is
Maybe, yeah, exactly, right. The effects of war on families, extend
It's all the
across
same.
different conflicts. Yeah, unfortunately, right.
Yes.
and I was just going to say, in terms of, our Zoom during COVID, I mean, that connection that we sort of revitalized in a different way was really useful for all of us, maybe in somewhat different ways. And in terms of having an emotional response to someone's artwork, I can remember someone commenting, and it was so not what I had intended the piece to evoke in someone, but I was very happy that it evoked something that was not personal to me, but it was personal to them. And I think at best, that's what we can hope for as artists, that somehow we spark something internal, maybe nonverbal in someone, even if it doesn't match what we're trying to do.
Carol, I'd like to follow up on that because you have such an interesting background that you're trained as both an artist and a psychotherapist. And so you were just touching on that in terms of kind of that sense of what's personal to you and then what's personal to the viewer and how they might kind of experience a sense of the universal and the particular. How do you bring, or do you kind of bring your psychotherapy into your artistic practice?
I think I don't in a conscious way. I think from a very early age, I was intrigued by wondering what other people's lives were like. Even as a little girl, I would walk by houses and look through their windows and think, well, what's happening in that world, in their world? And I particularly liked being able to look through one window and then another one so I could see the outside. So I wasn't stuck in the other world, but I could see through it. And I think in my artwork, that's what I'm trying to get to within myself, listening to myself, being able to sometimes have a thought and sometimes have a feeling and kind of put those things together to convey it in the work. And hopefully it has some common thread for other people.
Joe, kind of turning to your work, you focus on, often very everyday utilitarian items, tools and brushes, even towels, but you make them really incredibly out of paper and linen and wood and beads. When I saw the weights and measures work at 108, I actually gasped a little bit when I realized what I was looking at, kind of going to Lissa's point earlier. So kind of what prompted you to explore this kind of everyday subject matter in this way with these materials?
I think I grew up on a farm and had the best of both worlds where my family would take us into St. Louis on weekends and we would experience the arts and many aspects of culture in a larger city. But at the same time, I was living in nature and doing farm chores all week. And so I think my work navigates between the natural world and the domestic world. And so I'm thinking about, those walks in nature that I take on a regular basis and the impact that the change in seasons has on me personally. But I'm also thinking about those everyday moments in my life in the domestic environment and how those are as impactful and aesthetic as my experiences in nature and my experiences in museums and galleries. And so I think that I started looking at these tools as remnants of my background, and started exploring them as a to conceptually think about what my everyday life means to me, and perhaps how it impacts others and how they feel about their own lives as well. And as I have moved through that whole series with the tools, they became a little sassier, so that some of them are formal, but some of them have real attitude, and they no longer even are reminiscent of the tools that inspired them in the beginning. So I don't know if that explains exactly what I'm after, but that's sort of the history of how it evolved for me.
Mm-hmm. No, it does. And those ideas of kind of the everyday, the personal, the kind of the natural world, and then the art world are also kind of contexts, I think, Lissa, that I see in your work. And of course, you know, the wittiness, the a little bit of that sassiness that kind of Joe was characterizing too. And, you know, the way in which your work really engages with art history, and in particular, some of the works in this show with the genre of still life is, you know, especially interesting to me as an art historian. You've taken a genre that I think we often most closely or persistently associate with the medium of painting, and you're re-examining it through other materials, materials often kind of associated with craft practices. So what kind of prompted your interest in exploring still life as a genre, Lissa? And what questions are you asking of it?
I think a lot of it comes from the fact that basketry, which I was one of the crew here starting in that, and I did coiled baskets with paper on them, and they had a sort of reference to a tradition and also became more anonymous. I could make them what I wanted them to be and what I wanted them to say. And they were mostly all vessels. So that notion of still life, even if it was one basket, there was this object that existed in space that had its sense of history and its own voice. And so when I started then working more with shelves and boxes and things that held multiple objects, at first I thought of them almost as stages where these objects lived and did their thing. And then they became more specifically still life related, I think. And I did a little research. I have a BA in art, so I had to take art history, and I loved all of it. And I'm so grateful for it. I didn't love all of it then. I love all of it now, and I'm very grateful to have had it. But still life always spoke to me in paintings, in this whole notion starting very early on with decorating. The first art forms were sort of decorating the objects that people used in their very restricted lives and thousands of years ago. So that idea of objects in our lives and what they mean and how we cherish them, the whole idea of the memento mori, and the idea that there's this whole subset of still life that is to remind us of life and death at the same time. All of those things kind of gave me permission to go ahead and say, yeah, I'm going to do this. And I think also because I sort of uh, rediscovered drawing for myself in a way that it has allowed me then to be even more specific, because I can draw backgrounds, I can collage and draw on those and then put objects within that context. So it was over time, but I think it was almost inevitable because of making these things. And they're fun to make. I mean, it's fun to make a lot of little things and put them together and see how it works. It's almost like drawing with objects. You're making these objects and you say, okay, this one goes here. No, this one should be a little more this way, like you would in a drawing. And I guess I don't ask people to look at them as still lifes, and I don't ask them to sort of provoke this notion of art history. They're just the things I make.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. They kind of beautifully capture that idea of kind of still, but then that motion that you were talking about, the way in which they came to be, and then their afterlives as well. So, which I think is really encapsulated by the idea of still. Because of something still, maybe at one point it had been vibrating or pulsing or moving. And so, you know, you all kind of the four of you seem to intersect with this notion of kind of still of
Yeah.
the exhibition in different ways. What does that mean to each of you?
Mm-hmm. One of the things, I think, I'm just going to say this as an overall thing. We came up with the idea still as much as anything because it could be taken so many different ways. All of us tend to have a kind of stillness about our work. I think they don't shout and vibrate and carry on or move or anything, but also we're still doing it. We're very aware of the fact that we've been around for a long time and doing what we do for a long time, and we're delighted by that, proud of that. So this notion of still doing it and still life and a still from a movie that's ongoing and continual, but we take a moment and try to work with that. So as much as anything, I think it's because we all just immediately kind of found our way in that term, in that word, coming from the stillness that we all already have in our work.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I think one of the things that made all of us feel sort of excited and happy is we're still alive. It was during COVID. It was such an intense time. And none of us even considered or could have considered not doing what we've been doing. So I think there was a lot of joy in the idea of that we're still doing what we want to do.
Yeah, and I think that because each of our practices is slow, there's a kind of meditativeness and a stillness that we derive, a kind of a peacefulness, not 100% of the time, obviously, we can get frustrated with our work too. But generally speaking, I know it when I am making one of those structures with a basketry technique, whether I'm coiling it or twining it or knotting it or whatever, that to me that is a very peaceful activity for me that is part of stillness.
So Jane, what about you in terms of this notion of still? Because certainly peacefulness might not be the immediate thing that comes to mind when confronted with some of your work.
No, but the stillness or the labor intensity of my technique gives me lots of time to ruminate over many times it's over what's next. Are ideas that develop from what I'm working on at the current moment. I usually have some other things spread out, but it's interesting that when we started talking about still, I reflected on my past and that throughout a long career, I've dipped into making, I guess we'd call it political statements, but statements about my belief. It's not been a current theme all through my work, but my work has always had been an emotional response on my part to something. And my in this body of work, it reflects back to well, let me back up a little bit and say that for me still meant that I am still bothered by the same things and that I was very active in anti-war activities. I was very active in civil rights, and that I feel like I'm still asking for the same things. I'm still concerned about the same problems. And your question that you gave us ahead of time sort of made me reflect on well, where did this all come from? When did it start? And I was a very young child during World War II, but I grew up in a Jewish household, and I had a number of relatives that lived in Germany at the time of the war and were lost in the Holocaust. So I heard a lot of adult conversations that were probably more than I should have heard, because I can remember being very frightened about war and very frightened that somehow it was going to envelop me and I would be gone, consumed by it, because I did hear a lot about that. So I think early on I developed this attitude about, why can't we solve problems in a way other than killing each other? That there must be some way, and that here at age 87, I'm still struggling with that, and things haven't changed. And that if I do a piece about war, it's still going on. It's the same war. It's the same killing. So it was a very ripe conversation for me.
Yeah. Um, so kind of thinking about that, that kind of sense of, really thinking about the war coming into your house as part of these conversations that you're overhearing. And then your choice of using, textiles, sewing, embroidery, these kind of craft practices in kind of exploring these topics. Do you see that sense of, I guess, both care of the practices, but also then kind of conflict in that a quilt is something that does maybe warm you or envelop you, and then here when if you were in the galleries confronted by your quilt, then there's this kind of noise and sense of suffering and cognitive dissonance that's produced. Was that something that you were kind of intentionally exploring, that sense of conflict between maybe subject matter and medium, or how do you look at that relationship in your work?
There's no doubt that I do find the whole history of quilts, and quilts being statements, being used to make statements as well as covering up. But it's also a kind of, quilts, the American quilts were made out of clothes that were no longer useful, or little bits and pieces of things, and that they were used for cover up. I think cover up was my key word.
Okay.
And the doilies are the fancy cutout work, were used really by my grandmother and other people's grandmothers or relatives to cover up furniture so it wouldn't be damaged or scratched in any way. And so it seemed to me it was such a perfect metaphor for covering up what happens in wars and covering up probably the greed that goes along with many wars. And I just, oddly enough, how COVID fed into this was, during COVID, I just knew I had to make some artwork, that I had a lot of time on my hand. And I thought, I just have to start making art again. And I did not have supplies, but I did have some textiles that belonged to my grandmother. And I had some embroidery thread from projects that I did with my grandchildren for just fun. And I just put the two together. And then it more and more of these doilies that were used to cover up just became very important. And then I found a dress that had belonged to an aunt of mine. And it sort of, it just all fit together. And then I sort of, another part of that body of work were things, sort of sayings that had emotional content for me. And of course, I think every artist hopes that what they say, what they put out there, will mean something to the viewer, that it'll connect with the viewer. I guess we're egotistical enough to think our thoughts are important enough to connect with other people.
So you were talking about these, textiles from your grandmother, the doilies, and from your aunt. That idea of using found materials is something that I've noticed, in actually most of your work, uh, and including, Joe, Lissa, maybe Carol. You may have a
Little
few
bit.
kind of little bits here and there. Where do you source your kind of found items, and what makes you decide what is there a spark when you come across something that makes you decide to incorporate it into a work?
I think the collecting happens wherever we are. You just see something in the gutter. I still have my mother's voice in my head saying, "Don't touch that. You don't know where it's been." I think, but you still pick it up and put it in your pocket or whatever. I'm sure we all do that. Um, I don't know who has the largest number of boxes of things stowed away in her studio, but I imagine we all do. And so I think then when you're working with an idea, you either look and find what's appropriate, or you remember something that you had collected and you pull it out, and that takes you to the next step and starts working with it. I rarely, well, I do know people who go to the dump because they're looking for rusted metal and they know they can find it there or whatever. So there is that kind of gathering. But for me anyway, it really is just sort of a continual um, bringing in things and putting them aside and then looking through them and using them again. Occasionally one will spark um, an idea, but usually those things become in service to an idea that I'm working on.
I would say it's the same for me. I love going through flea markets and antique malls and just, they're artifacts of a time and a history that speaks to me. And every once in a while, I'll find something and I'll have no idea how I would ever use it, but it's speaking to me in a way that I feel like I need to have it in my environment. And that is how they end up in the work eventually. Not everything. There's lots of things that are just sitting around that have not, I don't feel like they've informed the work yet, but they might eventually when the time is right.
And Missouri has great antique malls. I
Mhm.
swear to God, I couldn't, when I visit Joe, that's one of the things we do. I'd rather do that than go out to eat.
Although we do that too.
No, that we do that too. Yes.
And I would say for me, once I retired, I was always doing my artwork in a rush because I was working and I had children, and I had a lot of failures, but I think I knew enough not to throw everything away. And I had started to incorporate drawing into my vessels because I like drawing and I didn't want to just be doing the coiling. So once I retired, I took a lot of my papers that I thought were failures and I started doing collages. And it's an incredibly satisfying endeavor because I could have a tiny piece that's of something of a drawing that I did in the past, and it's lost its preciousness. So it allows me to, I think, explore with less anxiety and less worry that, well, if it doesn't, it already didn't work. So there's a freedom for me in that. So those are more often my found objects, although I also do use, metal or a branch or something like that.
So let's talk about craft for a minute, because this exhibition is hosted in a gallery that is focused on contemporary craft. And your exhibition embodies so much of the histories of crafts, whether it's an emphasis on the everyday, the personal, very handmade items, that precision and care and workwomanship, it's kind of time and labor, and then even the kind of practice of women coming together to work and share. And so I'm curious, how important are those traditions to your kind of practices and to your conception of this exhibition as you developed it?
Hmm. Interesting. You know, I grew up in a family of seamstresses and makers. My parents were both makers. My dad was doing shop things. My mother was doing sewing and tailoring. And most of my aunts and uncles, my grandparents, we just come from a long line of makers. And so that's just part of how I grew up. And when in the 60s and 70s, when craft suddenly became renovated and revolutionized and started to become part of the mainstream conversation in the art world, it just seemed very natural to me. And today, I don't even personally, I don't see the difference between what traditionally was called fine art or craft. I think they've merged because the materials and the processes become as much part of the language as the ideas themselves. And so I use what I need to use to get my ideas across in terms of materials and processes. And so that's my perspective on that.
I would agree, but I think one of the things that happens by coming through craft, all of us, I think, had a fine arts component to our education and then a craft intensity kind of to our education, and then chose to follow through with sort of emphasizing craft, but we had that other sensibility going with us. And I think that's important. But also I think it's, painting is a craft. Carving marble is a craft. All of these things are a craft. So that I think for the artists, the limits are only what we set on ourselves. Traditionally, 50 years ago, the limits were set by galleries and programs and writing and all of that. There was a very strict line that was held, for us. But then at some point, we could decide kind of how we wanted to look at it. And as Jo says, she uses whatever material and techniques serve her idea of what she's doing. And I think that now, as opposed within craft, there is the functional craft, things that are repetitive because they need to be in terms of how they live in the world and all of that. And then there are people who are making things, as we are, that are not with that intent. So they exist in this kind of mush now of art and craft. And thank goodness we're here.
Right.
Yeah.
And I would say one of the things for me that's so useful is it's a different kind of energy when you're doing the repetitive coiling or nodding, but and if you think about stillness and quiet, it helps me. And yet I still feel as if I'm doing something that's going to enhance my artwork. I don't feel, I'm not giving anything up. But I'm still working, which feels really important. I mean, historically, that I'm not just sitting. I'm not a good sitter, so that helps a lot.
And I feel like they go for me, it goes hand in hand, my message and the tools that I'm using to express that. But I've actually always liked the repetitive, labor-intensive mediums. I've always been attracted to that. Sometimes I do get bored with, I've got to create, I have to get from here to here in order to make what I'm making. And I had this great idea, but now I've got to make the idea a reality. So sometimes I get bored because it is very slow, but sort of all along, I'm feeling like it all fits together. And I am interested in the fact that for me, stitchery has always been a way of sending messages or promoting discussions. So that fits very well.
Absolutely. So a question from one of our attendees, and this is for each of you, or any. When you're creating, how do you know when you're done with a piece? When do you choose to move on to a new project?
I asked
April's
Lissa.
question.
That is, actually, it's a very serious question, especially for people starting out, you know, as a student or as a, you know, a self-proclaimed artist. Here I am. And a lot of times it has to do with deadlines. You know, you have to finish something because it's due or whatever. And I think that's, for me, that's really important. And oftentimes something will be finished and then you'll look at it later and it's not finished. And then you make it finished. And that's the relationship of you and this thing that is a part of you out in the world. I probably 20% of what I've made then comes back or I rediscover and change in some way. And I think that's true with all, don't you all feel that way?
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
I've definitely gone back over things
Yeah.
and added to it, even though I thought it was done.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'm sad because it's in a state of existence that I can't do that. But then that's the idea for the next one.
Right. Yeah.
And I think it's more of a feeling rather than a physicalness of being complete, that this statement of whatever the object is feels like it's saying, or it's as close to saying what I want it to say, and so I'm done with it. But like Lissa and Jane, I often come back and add components, take things away, because I'll realize, no, it's not quite there yet.
Yeah. And Carol is one of the champion reworkers. She will take, she'll have something that has a body and a neck and then a thing on top. And next time I see her, the thing on top is something else and the neck is on something else. And so
And
there is
usually-
always that. I
Usually
think because
that
you
wo-
make it in the first place, you don't feel like you're desecrating somebody's,
No.
you know, work. It's our own. So
Yeah, and I was just gonna say, like Jane is saying, sometimes unfortunately things you can't change because of the structure. But you
Mhm.
just have to say, okay, what do I like out of it? And what can I think about using else? Not that particular piece, but what gesture can I take from it?
Mhm.
And then I turn it around so I don't have to look at it.
The power of the object. Uh, So another question from the audience for all. I noticed that your work in the exhibition has a really cohesive color palette. Was that deliberate or the result of your chosen materials and mediums?
I
Well,
think it was
wasn't
accident.
deliberate. Yeah.
It just is what is.
Yeah, I
You
think
know, it just,
that was our natural palette for each of us for this body of work.
Yeah.
We didn't really talk about that specifically, did we?
no, I don't think we ever thought about how, I think we thought about how each of our work would look with the other pieces we were sending, but
Right.
that we never talked about, well, does this color palette go with your color palette?
Right.
And it's just, it is what it is.
Mhm.
So we were laughing before, and that makes me kind of think about the use of humor in some of the works in the show, whether it's, you know, the what is it, tools of suspect origin or the spilt you know, cup. How I guess, what do you think about in terms of the role of humor and play kind of within your work? And this can be for you know, Joe or Lissa or Carol or Jane.
Well, I don't think I have much humor in my work.
I don't think I do.
So I can back off of this.
Yeah, you can sit back and listen on this.
I don't have to answer this one.
I think I'm a I see the world as a funny place. Even today, I think the world has a lot of humor in it. Because if I don't believe that, you know, whatever. So I think if I am going to be, I don't censor myself when I think something is a funny idea to do. I just think, okay, I'll just do it. And I think a lot of times people think, oh, artists, you know, you're so lucky you get to be in your studio and creating all the time, and it's profound. And you think, well, actually, it's just a person doing what she does in her life to make it out there, you know. So if humor is a part of what you see and do, and Jane is a very funny person, so she chooses not to use humor in her work, but you know, that's just a part of that communication with the viewer. It's great for people to see something and smile or laugh. I think that's a gift.
And I would add to what Lissa is saying, that there's enough seriousness going on in the world that we're all dealing with and struggling to understand and figure out how to resolve. And some of that carries over into our studio practice. But for me, I like that sense of joy and whimsy that can find its way into my work. It's part of what keeps me going in the work itself. And so whether other people see that or not, I have it internally with what I'm doing. And that's important for me.
And I do think it's important to remind people what we have to lose, that beauty is worth fighting for, that humor is worth fighting for, that being human is worth fighting for. So that I don't think it's separate from the more serious, specific kinds of political comments. I think it's all of a piece.
Beautiful, Lissa. So another question from an attendee. This is a good one. How do you influence each other or critique each other?
Could you repeat the last part of that?
Sure. So how do you influence each other or critique each other?
Well, I feel like I'm talking a lot, but Joe and I have been separated at birth in our artistic careers. For 40 years, 50 years, we have been on a very similar path with what we do in terms of the things we make and how we see it and what
we have the same muse.
Yes, we have the same muse. So there is that. And so the influences, although I must say I'm influenced now because she makes the most gorgeous paper that she lets me use. So that's a big influence, very specific influence. And Carol and I, because we live an hour apart, we have studio days together. I'll go down there and spend a couple of days in the studio, and we just work side by side on our own work. And maybe I'll say, what does this work better or this? And she'll say that. You know, so there is that kind of input back and forth because we're next door to each other, so almost. So there has been that. To round this out, though, I'm going to say that Jane was, from the beginning, my hero in all as she did and how she conducted her life and her artistic life and the generosity with which she has always conducted her artistic life, and that has been a great influence on me.
And also on me, because I always looked upon Jane as one of my mentors as I was growing up in the artistic world. And but also Jane's work comes in at this point in her life, has a more serious tone that I think that we're all really paying attention to, because the way that she's producing that work is so evocative and thought-provoking, and although it's very different from the work that I produce or Lissa or Carol produces, we are all being influenced by, you know, how each of us are talking about the work, and the admiration and respect that we have for each other and what each of us does.
Mm-hmm. And I would just say, I'm probably the only one of the four of us. I've taken a class from each of these women who, you know, I was the novice, and I was a weaver, and I couldn't didn't have time to weave. So I took a class from everyone, and really, they're all my mentors. So it feels awfully good to be in this group. It's a wonderful group.
And I have to add to that, thank you for the nice things that you said about me. I appreciate that. But I have to say that I was thrilled to be part of this group, that it was a real impetus to express what was in me that I wanted to express. And I just want to also say that I really appreciate that 108 showed my work too, because it's not, and that my three friends here were willing to show it with me, because it's not easy work. It's not, you don't look at it and feel like, oh, how beautiful. It's, it's disturbing. So I really appreciate that you guys would show with me and that 108 would show the work. I had some doubts as I went along, and I was just waiting for somebody to speak up. And I thought, well, the best thing to do is just keep my mouth shut.
Which is not easy all the time.
No, that is not easy.
But you speak through your work, right? So, that's where the voice comes in. Okay, so in closing, we have just, a few minutes left. What are you all working on now? You just gave birth to this big exhibition. Will the exhibition travel? And then what's in the future for you?
We have not talked about whether the show will travel. That was a question that came up when I went to the reception last week, and I sent a little email out to everybody saying they want to know if this is going to travel. We have had very informal thoughts about, okay, so what's next? Do we want to do another show? If so, what kind of a show would we want it to be? Where would we want it to be shown? But I think we're all still digesting what we just did.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I do think, each time, I think I'm not just speaking for me, but each time I complete a show, it's not that I complete the body of work, but that the time makes me complete the body of work at that point. But then there's always that at the end, I always have, I have such a good idea for something else that just inevitably happens. That is a better idea than anything I have in the show. That I wish I had done this for the show. Why do I get the idea now? But it is that you have this next thing that you think you'd like to do. Or I have gotten ideas from seeing the other three people's work.
Yeah.
Oh.
But I love hearing that, because I am exactly the opposite. Once I get, something done, it's like, I always call it postpartum depression. It's like, you've done all this work and get it done. And it's like, what now? Until there's some other reason to kind of get going. And so I will take that to heart, Jane, and say, okay, I better come up with something good for the next one.
But we have started to, I haven't talked with Carol where you're thinking about going next. But I know, Lissa, you were talking about the three-dimensional drawings, and I'm feeling like my tool series is ready to be put to bed for a while and move on to some other things. And so we're incubating.
I think we all work in this same way of taking materials and techniques and ideas and putting them together and making our work, which is, nothing profound there. But it means that sometimes it means, okay, I found this new material. I'm going to do what I've always done, but I'm using this new material and it will take me somewhere. Or I found a new technique that I can add into what I've been doing and I could go somewhere. Or I come up with the idea. I recently, wonder of wonders, have come up with wanting to know more about chaos and order and what that means in nature, what that means in art, what that means generally, and how that could, because those seem very visual to me, the notion of, okay, so I'm starting with an idea now that then I'll sort of stick my other stuff onto. And I think Jane, you'll probably continue with ideas that you're working with now. And Joe, you're at the point where you're going to maybe go to another set of ideas as opposed to the tool series.
It'll be related, but it'll be different. Yeah, it's different conceptual.
Yeah, they're always related. Yeah. And Carol, I know you've already begun doing some work, which is different, physically different. So we're still doing it. We're not going to quit.
Great. And ties back into kind of the impetus for the show, right? You're all still here, you're still working, and still very much contributing to these kind of artistic conversations. Well, that concludes our time. So thank you so much to Yona Sienna Jasper and Danielle Terrio for providing live ASL interpretation, and especially to our artists, Lissa Hunter, Jane Sauer, Joe Stealey, and Carol Stein for sharing their work with us and indulging me today. Their exhibition Still is on view at 108 Contemporary in downtown Tulsa through September 20th, 2025. Their beautiful catalog that they put together is also available for purchase. You can visit 108contemporary.org for more information. So many thanks to our attendees and our artists, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you,
so
Kirsten.
much.
Person,
Thank
thank
you.
you. 108.